All right. Hello, everybody. Today we have. Oh, sorry. This is going to take me a little while. Hello, everybody. We have Dr. Hickmott here. Dr. Hickmott, would you like to just introduce yourself a little bit to everybody?
Hello, everybody. My name is Peter Hickmott. I'm a professor in the Department of Psychology here at UCR, as you can see by my background. And I'm happy to be here talking about brain myths and brain facts and brain fun.
Awesome. So let's get into busting some brain beliefs, some myths about the brain. The first one that comes to mind is we only use 10% of our brain. So for me, that kind of reminds me of Matilda. I don't know if anyone has seen it, where she, uses more of her brain and she utilizes more of her brain and she gets these superpowers. So if I use my brain more, will I become like Matilda, or am I using my brain the way that I'm supposed to?
Well, for one thing, use all of your brain. So, I'm actually not 100% sure where that 10% figure came from. I know it's based on old, I think, electroencephalograph data, where, but I'm not really sure where it comes from. But it's one of those myths that sort of self-perpetuates. So it's not true. All parts of the brain you don't necessarily use it equally for all tasks, but there's no real estate in the brain that is not used for something consistently.
Shucks. Okay. So my Matilda dreams are...
You can still get superpowers. It's just, you'll have to go the radioactive spider route.
Ooh, okay. Might have to find a lab for that then. All right, so next myth. Are brain transplants possible?
It depends on what you mean by a brain transplant, for one thing. So it's certainly possible to introduce cells into the brain that will live and carry out certain sorts of functions. But right now, really not really now. And you certainly can't do a Star Trek where you take out Spock's brain and put it in a computer and then Dr. McCoy comes and transplants it back in. No. There is a lot of interest in improving our ability to introduce new cells into areas of the brain that are damaged for just neurodegenerative disorders like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's disorder or what have you. And so the ability to do so is definitely improving. It's better now than it was 10 years ago. It will be better in 10 years in ways that we don't even know.
Cool. Thanks. So our next myth that we'd like to ask you. So this one might have a couple different facets to it. So that people are right or left brained. So either like one left brain person is like smarter than the other, or being one or the other lends to like different personality traits. Is that, have you heard much about that? Read much about that?
I've heard way too much about that, but anyway, there's a lot of parts to that sort of question and that thinking about that way. So let's start off with some basic true facts, and that is, of course, you do have two sides to the brain, the left side and the right side.
Duh.
Second part that's true is that the two sides are not necessarily identical. They don't process information in exactly the same way. They may be associated with processing, again, different types of information in sort of the same location on the left as the right. So it's also true that the two sides are different and that they do have, different processing, different things that they tend to focus on in processing. How does that relate to personality? Well, now that's a slightly different question. First off, just to be clear, we don't know what all the determinants are of personality. Obviously, they reside in the brain and in the body somehow. There really isn't evidence that suggests that there's a left brain dominant personality and a right brain dominant personality. People obviously have personalities. They have cognitive styles. But that's not necessarily because you use the left side of your brain more than the right side. It's a much bigger, more complex issue, which of course relates to how your brain developed based on genetic factors and environmental factors and what have you. But it's not really, left, right.
So then I think you might have mentioned this a little bit, in that your brain is a computer. Are we gonna go in the way of like the robot, or am I already a robot?
When you say the brain is a computer, of course, that's a metaphor, right?
Okay.
You're applying you're calling the brain something that it's obviously not. A brain is not a computer. It wasn't built by, Apple or Dell or what have you. Silicon chips in it. It doesn't even run on basically binary coding. Not exactly. So it's a metaphor. Like any metaphor, it has what you might think of as strengths and weaknesses. It seems pretty clear is that there are computations that the brain does do. The brain extracts information from the environment, obviously, in ways that are meaningful for the organism to drive behavior. Some sorts of computations are performed by networks of neurons and networks of neurons and glia, by circuits and systems. I think that most neuroscientists would agree with that, although not all of them. I was just actually reading an article about the metaphor and how bad it is, but I'm not going to get into that. It's a both useful and non-useful thing. I mean, it's useful, I think, in that it's trying to point to the fact that we're trying to explain behavioral phenomena like perception or consciousness based on actual physical entities, neurons, glia, circuits. And in that respect, I think it's useful to take that perspective. That's what we do as neuroscientists, basically. But I think it can also obscure very important ways that the brain does things that a computer really doesn't. So, and as I say, there are whole branches of philosophy that would say, the brain is nothing like a computer, that's totally useless, and I don't want to go into that at all because that's not my expertise. Mm-hmm. Next time, bring in Eric Schwitzgebel next time if you want a much more interesting elucidation of philosophy of mind and consciousness. He's in the philosophy department. He's very interesting to talk to. Keep using your brain.